This is Usain Bolt almost jogging a world record way back in 2009. That performance propelled him into the hearts and souls of track and field fans all across the globe. At that time, it was one of the single most impressive moments ever seen in the entire history of track and field. But many people have forgotten that Asafa Powell was once the king of the hill for doing almost the same thing. This is Asafa Powell on September 9, 2007, clocking an insane 9.74 seconds, breaking his own world record. Asafa was crossing the finishing line while slowing down, but it made the fans super upset because to them, he was squandering the precious opportunity to record even way more mind-boggling times. For almost a decade, Usain Bolt's dominance was so crazy it overshadowed a couple of great sprinters who otherwise could have been seen as some of the greatest. They never really got enough credit for what they brought to the sport, and Asafa Powell is definitely one such sprinter. When you consider the fact that Asafa Powell is the fastest sprinter to not have won an individual world or Olympic title in his entire career, it shows that something was drastically wrong where this sprinter was concerned. And this must truly be the saddest story in the history of track and field. Now, Asafa Powell rose to prominence in 2005 when he obliterated Maurice Green's world record at the Gateshead International Stadium in Great Britain by 2/100ths of a second. Powell clocked 9.77 seconds to erase the previous 9.79 seconds that was the standing world record for almost 6 years. What was even more impressive was that he was able to equal his world record time of 9.77 seconds on two other occasions the following year, 2006. No other athlete in the history of the 100 meters was able to equal their own record on so many different occasions. It then became clear Asafa Powell was not just an ordinary athlete. He was literally a beast on the track, being able to achieve so much more than most sprinters. He was literally made from sub-10 material. Almost every time he entered the track, he would clock a sub-10 time. In fact, he clocked an insane number of sub-10 seconds. To be exact, he dropped 97 sub-10 seconds in his entire career, gifting him the title the sub-10 king. Not even the great Usain Bolt came close in this regard. Asafa Powell is considered by many experts to be the perfect model of what a sprinter should look like. His technique, his block start, drive phase, and his entire form was one to be coveted. One expert was quoted saying, "If you give him clay in his hands to model the perfect sprinter, it would be Asafa Powell for him." Most recently, Noah Lyles was asked this question: in track and field history, is there an athlete that you think has the best form and everything put together? This was his reply.
Truthfully, it's crazy when I say this because he's known as a choker, but Asafa Powell, the man puts together perfect races. His execution of the start, his reaction times, his acceleration, his transition, smooth, it's relaxed when he's not under pressure, and he finishes. He never fails, and everybody who watches his race and is like, "Oh, his world record could have been so much greater." He's like, "Yeah, it could have. It was just a mindset." And when I look at his race, I'm like, "Yeah, that man has what I consider one of the perfect models for sprinting in the 100."
Having said all of this, the big question that bothers the track and field world is how does a man with such talent and abilities not have an individual goal in none of the two major championships? Let's answer that. Asafa Powell was discovered by world-renowned track and field coach Stephen Francis, who most persons consider to be the best or one of the greatest sprint coaches in the history of track and field. His track record as a coach is just insane and also mostly unmatched. Lane Thompson-Herah, Shericka Jackson, and Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce are some of the great athletes that must credit their success to the hands of Stephen Francis. Speaking of Shelly-Ann, She shared coach with Asafa Powell at the same time at one point in her career, but the difference was that she knew how to win in major races and when it mattered most. Unfortunately, Asafa never seemed to have learned or developed that ability, which you will see that it cost him dearly in his career. Asafa Powell was an awesome runner, but he had a serious problem that I'll prove to you was able to be fixed but was left to go away by chance. Over the life of his career, Powell made it to the Olympics 4 times consecutively: 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016. He competed in the 100 meters in 3 of these Olympics except for 2016, where he only ran as a part of the 4x100 meter relay team. In all these 100 meter races, the theme was the same for him. He never made it to the podium, and worse, he never got a title. This was very heartrending for not just his fans but for Powell himself, and here's why. In 2004, Powell had the fastest semi-final time at the Athens Games, then placed 5th in the final that was won by Justin Gatlin. In 2008, something very similar happened. Though he had injuries earlier in the season, Powell had the second fastest semi-final time in Beijing going into that final. What happened? He was placed 5th in the Olympic final yet again. Powell could run as fast as lightning when the competition was not as strong, but as soon as much was at stake, he fades into his usual mediocre performance, leaving the world to wonder. And many persons started criticizing him without even taking the time to truly understand his situation. Asafa Powell's problem was not his feet, it was his mind, which was no fault of his own, of course. The truth is, competitions bring a lot of physical and mental stress that is very hard to cope with. And on top of that, there's anxiety, who is a very real and serious enemy to athletes. Research has shown that there's a very big correlation between body and mind, and that usually affects the overall performance. There's a story of a former weightlifter in the Soviet Union who was extremely gifted and had all the physical traits to do well, but he was failing to do so. So a sports psychologist was called in to run a test on the athlete, who later found out that the athlete was too calm in his approach and he was not angry and aggressive enough. The psychologist pointed out to the coach that the athlete was going to be hard to help due to this finding, but someone suggested that they needed a way to make the athlete angry. With this in mind, the coach watched the athlete at another major meet. The athlete failed in the first 2 attempts, but before the third and the last attempt, the coach grabbed him and started shouting. He called him a bum and a scoundrel and spat in his face. The lifter went out with his blood boiling, snatched the barbell, and eventually took first place in that competition. That was what the weightlifter needed to excel. Now, Shericka Jackson recently revealed that after she made that grave error in the Tokyo 200 meter semi-final when she shut things down too soon and failed to qualify for the final, she was so badly affected that she had to take therapy sessions to get herself back to the place where she could run and win again. I said all of that to say this. Asafa Powell's problem could probably have been fixed had his handlers engaged a sports psychologist. His mental strength was his major problem, and we saw a huge improvement when Usain Bolt somewhat inspired him to think and act differently at the 2009 World Championships, where he got a bronze medal in that final. For me, this was where they blundered. I'm not sure who is it that we should blame here, whether it's the sprinter or the coach or his managers or his handlers, but someone made a huge mistake. So many athletes out there have been faced with the same thing, and what did they do? They went for the specialist help in a sports psychologist and they started winning. Some athletes even said that once they figured that there was a mental issue, They never left their psychologist again when they are showing up for any big meet. That person is always there doing what it takes to get them into that frame of mind that will make them win.